You likely know the Assistant Coach of the Year award is named after Frank Broyles, but at this rate, Iowa defensive coordinator Phil Parker may be a co-namesake. Best DC in the country has led Iowa to 8 straight seasons, allowing fewer than 20 points per game, the longest such streak in the country by a long stretch, and the longest in the Big Ten by a full 5 seasons. Now, the Iowa defense is seemingly never a question. Offense has been a different story as of late. A lot now expected of first-year OC Tim Lester, but by many accounts, Lester may not be relying on the quarterback we all expected to start the season, as former Northwestern signal caller Brendan Sullivan continues to push Cade McNamara for the job. And the man who sent that tweet, Scott Dochterman of The Athletic, is today's guest for the big interview. Scott, I want to start there. You got a firsthand look at that quarterback competition. You've heard from others who have been watching it as well. What have you seen and what have you heard regarding this budding quarterback competition between Sullivan and McNamara?
It's something that's probably started back in June when Cade McNamara finally was healthy and cleared after his ACL tear last year. And there's been some questions as to how he can handle the new offense under Tim Lester. And I think through camp, that's really been a struggle for him. And I think a lot of it may be what his confidence level is in his knee. He's not necessarily pushing off and stepping with his left knee that he tore against Michigan State last year. And the other day when they had an open scrimmage, the first time that the public had a chance to look at it, he was 8 of 24, and he was late on a lot of passes. He was struggling getting the ball to players that were open. And I think when you look at Brendan Sullivan, however, and we all kind of remember what he was like in Northwestern, he wasn't great necessarily against a very good Iowa defense, but he was efficient. And at times he seemed to be more comfortable. He was able to kind of pick and pop where he needed to throw, make the makeables, as Iowa likes to say. So from what I've been hearing, and it was kind of confirmed on Saturday, that right now Brendan Sullivan is outperforming Cade McNamara.
Well, Scott, it's interesting because you bring up Tim Lester, obviously the change from Brian Ferentz, the oft-criticized former offensive coordinator. What kind of philosophical change do you expect to see under Tim Lester for a head coach that has been we've been here, we've done it, we are not going to vary from the script for a quarter century now of success in Iowa City?
I think the tenets and principles of Iowa will remain the same. They're going to be a blocking team. They're going to be a zone running team. But how they execute within the zone is completely different now. I mean, I saw a lot of plays, the makeup of those plays that were different. They use and incorporate a lot more motion, some RPOs, and if Brendan Sullivan wins the job, probably some zone read as well. And I saw some really well executed and designed plays. And then I think in the passing game, what we're seeing is a little bit more spacing. I think you're seeing more in tune with the play action to where the receivers are supposed to be on the field. And I've had some defensive assistants just kind of tell me, look, that this motion has done some wonders to our defense, and we've had to prepare differently for it because they've caused them some problems in their run fits. And as we know, Iowa's defense is always really good in that area. So it's really been helpful for the defense, but primarily I've seen a much better blocking team up front because the motion has enabled their linemen to reach their aiming points a little bit easier.
Scott, I don't want to simplify this too much, but the RPO, the zone read, those are two things that Brendan Sullivan has done well. They're two things that doesn't necessarily fit inside the toolbox of Cade McNamara. Could it come down to a decision as simple as that? Listen, these are the plays on our sheet. One quarterback is simply better suited to do it than the other.
I believe that's going to probably be the case. I think Cade McNamara has built some equity within the program. Kirk Ferentz will give him an opportunity because he's not one to yank a quarterback for another, but I think he's going to look at who executes the offense better. And right now, that's clearly Brendan Sullivan. He has shown an ability to lead this team in small spurts and play well against a good defense. I think the thing that really caught my eye was in a 2-minute drill on Saturday, he was 5 of 6 passing and took the team right down the field against, again, a really good defense, whereas Cade just seemed to really struggle. I'm sure Kirk Ferentz will give him an opportunity, Cade McNamara, to work his rust off, to execute the offense, but ultimately it's about winning games, and this is the type of year for Iowa where you push all your chips to the middle of the table. They have an elite defense returning. They've got a lot of good pieces, 151 career starts up front. They're the healthiest and best looking that they've been in years up front. They've got a good defensive backfield and a really good running back core. This is the year where you've got to push towards the college football playoff. And if Brendan Sullivan's your guy, I believe that's the way they're going to go.
Iowa has always had good years when they've had good centers. That's the case again this year with Logan Jones, unquestioned leader on that offensive line. But, Scott, the question remains explosives. What players on this roster, when opposing defenses go 8 in the box, because you know they are going to, can threaten on the outside and make this offense more than a one-dimensional unit?
That is going to be the biggest question outside of quarterback for this team, because we've seen it over the last 3 to 4 years that they haven't had the wide receivers to break those explosive plays. Now, they've got a bunch of guys who are pretty good athletes, and they're working within the system because it is, again, it's a new system. But I'm not so sure that any one singularly stands out. Perhaps Caleb Brown, who's suspended for the opener for an arrest in the offseason. There's a couple others, Seth Anderson, the son of Flipper Anderson, the former NFL wide receiver, who I think looks pretty good in parts, but he wasn't there on Saturday. He was a little dinged up. And Caden Weegan, who's an electrifying walk-on, very fast player. I think he can do some good things as well. And then finally, tight end Luke Lachey is one of the best in the country and probably would be in an NFL training camp right now if he hadn't broken his leg in his 3rd game. I think he's as good as any of the other preceding tight ends, and I don't say that lightly. He's got the skill set that everybody would really want. So if they can at least move the ball effectively to the wide receivers, stretch the field, and make plays out of the tight end, I think this running game will have the opportunity to execute for the best in its best season since 2020.
Scott, I think it's fascinating because no one talks about the job that Kirk Ferentz and Phil Parker do from a mentality standpoint, keeping this offense and defense together. The offense was the worst per play in the country last year. The defense was the best, yet we don't see any friction. How have they accomplished that?
It's almost miraculous if you think about it, Rick, because we've seen fractured teams and they usually go south. In this case, they pick each other up. And a lot of that is the respect that they have for Kirk Ferentz. Players on all ends, they believe in him. That's why they have one of the lowest attrition rates when it comes to transfers in the Big Ten and in the country. And they really respect one another. And I think it also stems from their leadership. And that's kind of year to year. A guy like Jack Campbell, who was the Butkus Award winner, passes that down to Jay Higgins. Completely different personalities, but they have the same leadership ability. And I think that's really something that's rare today. And I think Kirk Ferentz does a really good job of preaching, do your job. And the defense in some ways kind of relished it for a little bit, that hey, the game's always on us. But of course, I'm sure they would like a few more points too.
You know, I think Jay Higgins, he probably doesn't care, but he would like maybe a little bit more respect. I'm not sure how a guy who sets a program record and is the FBS's leading tackler doesn't get the individual attention. Maybe it's because the team around him is also so good. How good can Higgins be this year? Can he be even better than he was, as productive as he was in 2023?
I think he could be a better player, and I think he'd like to have 40 fewer tackles. Because the one thing is, you mentioned about yards per play. Iowa led the country in that category and had 196 more defensive snaps than number 2, which was Penn State. So if you can remove some of that wear and tear off of him, I think it'll make him a much more effective player, and that really stems on the offense. But, one of the things he doesn't do, he's not necessarily a blitzer. He's a strict middle linebacker, and as we know, we love statistics. We love sacks, and we love interceptions. And tackles are just kind of tackles. But he is the unquestioned leader of this team. He has a great bubbly personality that really everybody responds to. And his cohort, Nick Jackson, is only 115 tackles shy of setting the FBS record because he had 4 years at Virginia and he enters his 2nd year at Iowa.
You also have Y.A. Black, Sebastian Castro. I mean, we're talking about a defense that returns over 100 starts from just last year and 9 guys who made at least 6 starts. They could be off the charts good, but there's still one question to answer, Scott, right? And it's the narrative that Iowa benefited and got to the Big Ten championship game on multiple occasions because they played in the weaker West. How important do you think it is to the players that are on this team that have been to those championship games to have the kind of year this year in a divisionless Big Ten that would erase that narrative from being any part of the conversation?
I'm sure they would love it. I do also think, though, that the that the schedule will play a role for Iowa. When you look at it, they do go to Columbus, and that's going to be an awfully big task for them, but they don't play Oregon, Penn State, or Michigan. So I think people will automatically look at, hey, well, you played Washington, but Washington was down, or you went to UCLA and not USC. But I think in some respects, it is a little bit overblown. Last year, there's no question that they were not among the top 3 teams in the Big Ten, and they benefited from a down West division. But this was the only program in the West that beat every team in the East during that 10-year block and had the best cross-divisional record of any team in the West division. So they've been comfortable playing those teams. They were successful before the division structure, but I do think that they have a point to prove. And if the offense can come around, if quarterback, whether it's Brennan Sullivan or Cade McNamara, can make strides and they can stay relatively healthy, this is a team we're going to be talking about, Rick, in late November as a possible college football playoff contender.
Scott, you make some great points. As long as you and I have both been in this business, we know that reality and perception don't necessarily always work in a straight line together. Scott Dochterman, great stuff as always on the Iowa Hawkeyes. We appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
We have much more on that stout defense, the QB competition, and all things Iowa football, including practice video and exclusive interviews coming your way later with the Training Camp Tour Iowa Football Show. The debut airing set for Friday, August the 16th at 8 Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. Will Iowa be among Ross's dark horses to start 2024? And who else joins the Hawkeyes on the list of the overlooked? Those answers and much more still to come here on Big Ten Today.